1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, warriors. Welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host, Ingrid. As I've shared over the last few episodes, this year's Domestic Violence Awareness Month carries two powerful themes: with survivors always and everyone knows someone. Today's episode reflects both. I'm honored to welcome Vanessa and Yaneth, who will share the advocacy work of Vivan Las Autonomas and the story of Yaneth's sister, Lizzbeth. Let's get started. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Before we get into our conversation, do you mind just giving a little bit of a background on yourselves, just so the listeners get to know you some?
My name is Vanessa. I'm a Peruvian-born immigrant based in Connecticut. I am a community organizer and advocate. I founded Vivan Las Autonomas, which is an organization that supports and organizes families impacted by femicide, as well as supporting survivors, victims of domestic and sexual violence.
Okay. Do you want to talk about a little bit more about your organization? And I mean, you mentioned already what it does, and I'm sure most people understand what femicide is, but just to bring everybody up to speed so we're all on the same page.
Of course. No, I appreciate the question. I actually find it in my work that most people don't know what femicide is, both in English and in Spanish. Femicide is the intentional killing of a woman because of her gender. And, I came into this work and bringing awareness around femicide because of what happened to Lizzbeth and her killing in 2020. It was at a time where I myself had been navigating years of the judicial system as a survivor of sexual abuse and that experience. And then I heard about Lizzbeth's case, that she had been missing for some time and that she was then found. And there was no community organizing around the time, despite that there are a lot of immigrant-led advocacy groups in the area. But there was no focus to gendered violence. And there was no really advocacy around what happens when women are missing in our community, or what happens when women are murdered in our community because of domestic violence, because of intimate partner violence. And so, Vivan Las Autonomas started, and our work started really in response to the need for Lizzbeth's family at the time, who was looking both for community and support to navigate something that was so unexpected and traumatic, and that as a community, right, we hadn't yet known how to come together in this way, right? How to break from this idea that domestic violence happens to just one person and it's an isolated issue, and to look at it really, how is this a community issue? How are we failing to respond to this, right? And who are the entities that are failing to respond, right? And in Lizzbeth's case, she was living in a town in East Haven that was predominantly white, and predominantly a lot of Italian families. It was not a very welcoming community to immigrants. In fact, it had history of actually the police being very violent and racist towards the immigrants. And there was there was a whole FBI investigation. And so it, when Lizzbeth was missing and when everything was happening, it was no surprise that folks in East Haven were not talking about it, were acting as if it didn't matter. Yet in this small little town that I grew up in when I moved to Connecticut, I know that if it had been a white woman that had gone missing, a young white mother, 27 years old, like Lizzbeth, I know it would have been a talk of the town. And it was very hurtful to me, as an immigrant who lived there for so long, to feel like, so if something happens to us, no one cares, no one asks questions, no one says anything. And so our work began both in trying to raise awareness within the community, but also calling out the town officials, the mayor, the police department, of why aren't they doing more? Why aren't they doing more? Because frankly, from our end, the family did so much, Yanni did so much, the sister did so much, and the justice that we have gotten today for Lizzbeth, everything that we've gotten for Lizzbeth has really been because of the family, and their willingness to fight for justice and to not give up and to make sure that, her story is known and it doesn't just end in the violent way that her life was taken, but that there's really more to her story than that. And so I think that, when you walk with families through this journey that's been more than 4 years, you learn so much, not just about what things could have been done, how we as a community, right, could intervene to stop this, but you learn so much too about how these systems are failing women, whether they report or not, right? It's really not about us and this burden that is placed on victims to do everything in order to prevent our deaths. It's just too much.
So before we get into Lizzbeth's story in a little bit more detail, I know in that case, you guys jumped right in and you were helping with the investigation and all of that. Is there anything else that your organization does besides helping with finding information and seeking justice?
Yeah, so we help families navigate the legal system, right? Whether both from, before police make an arrest, pushing police to make an arrest, right? To move on something when an arrest is made, navigating the whole process, pre-trial to trial. Outside of that too, we do community organizing. We've done campaigns to specifically raise awareness in cases of femicide, like in Lizzbeth's case, also in the case of Roya Mohammadi, who's an Afghan Muslim woman who was murdered, and her case has, not been properly investigated by police. And so we do a lot of cultural and artistic events in the community, vigils and art festivals, all that are really dedicated to not just raising awareness about domestic violence, about femicide, about sexual violence, but also really trying to make a shift, in our culture, in our society, as far as how we understand these issues and how we understand what we're able to do about it, right? Because many of us, even when we grieve for the loss of a woman, we still see it as something like, well, what could I have done, right? If she didn't report, if she didn't do this, right? And in reality, there's so many things that we as a community can be doing to help make that shift in society, and so that the burden isn't always on the victims, because a lot of the time, victims are already doing a lot to get themselves out of these situations. And I just don't think that we're meeting them where we need to be. And their deaths, right, proves that. And then when we're not taking the time to really stop and process what led to their deaths, right? What happened, to really unpack that, then we're losing this opportunity, right? That is to learn from that and to really prevent it in a real way. Because we say that domestic violence is preventable, and we know that it is. And yet when it happens, we almost accept that it sort of happens in our communities, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I so appreciate what your organization is doing, because, victims, even if they survive, they're still very much victimized, and it's really difficult for them to seek justice on their own. And the perpetrators or the abusers are typically very removed from any sort of empathy or accountability of what they've done. So they actually can go in and be calm and collected and look like they're the ones who are not the crazy one. The victim a lot of the times looks like they are the crazy individual because they're so emotional from the abuse that they've been experiencing. So I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing with the victims and families and seeking justice. I know in this case you had just started your organization, right? Like, so how did you?
Yeah, we were just like a collective of girls. We were just young. We were all around Yaneth's age, and we had done, years of organizing around the immigrant community, and so we had that experience. And we had just we're doing a lot of work to support independently victims of domestic and sexual violence. We were doing like grassroots fundraisers, getting emergency supplies, getting emergency stays at hotels for victims who were escaping violence. So we were doing that at a small scale. But then, I got a call from a friend in New York who was like, there's someone in your community in New Haven that needs help. And it was, I think the fact that it was even someone calling us from New York to express this need said so much about how that was a gap in a void of like no one is actually responding to gendered violence in our community, in our advocacy groups, in our organizing groups, right? We don't have a place for families to go to when this happens other than the police. But what do you do when the police aren't responding, right? What do you do when the police are believing the lies of the perpetrator? What do you do when, they're buying into misogyny, right? And this idea that, women just take off, women just disappear, women just abandon their families, right? What do you do when police are so biased and, failing to respond with urgency in the deaths of Black, brown, Indigenous women, right? And there's no community group that is there to fill that need, right? And so we started as a group of young women who just really wanted to be there for Yaneth, who also has sisters and couldn't imagine what this would be like if we got, if our sister went missing, and, we would have turned to each other. And so that's kind of how we started. And frankly, like, Yaneth's courage and her, that fire of just like that lights inside you, that I think that she really led the way for us. We were right there behind her, and when we had her side, her back, her front, but it was really her showing us like, what do you do when your sister's missing, and she went and she did a lot of the groundwork before we got connected with her, and I think a lot of our work was sort of helping also navigate with the media, because they weren't covering this issue, and what does it look like when they do start to cover this issue, but how to do it in a sensitive way and in a way that honors the victim's life, right? Not just that moment of death and how she was found, because Lizzbeth, it was very violent and very brutal, though not just the way in which she was killed, but the aftermath of it too. And the way that, he tried to discard her body, that was another form of violence, that was another way of killing her again, and so I think that it, really, we stand because, Yaneth's experience, her family taught us that, so many families are left really alone when their loved one, who is a woman, is killed, who, when police say a woman, quote, is found dead, there's really a lot more to that. And often because of the way the media portrays it, which is similar to the way police portray it, which is just woman found dead, we don't ask questions, and we think that that maybe they died, we just want to assume they died in a non-violent way, but that's usually not the case. When a woman is found dead, that doesn't just coincidentally happen. We're not just birds dropping from the sky. Most cases it's not, especially when they're found in their homes, like women were killed violently. And I think that it's very harmful the way that, the media continues and police to sort of minimize this issue of femicide, right? Of just like, domestic violence is an isolated issue. when it's not. And we see it happening across our communities, across race, across language, across economic status, across everything, you know?
Yeah. And so you and I talked before, and I said I had heard the story on another podcast. And as I was listening, I was just infuriated with hearing how much of the investigative work was done by the family. And I thought that was not fair. But of course, the part that was sticking out to me was domestic violence, and the frustration that I had with a lot of domestic violence cases is where it's just easier to believe the perpetrator than to really dig into it. For those listeners who are not familiar with the story, do you guys mind sharing a little bit, as much as you want, in whatever detail, as far as what happened?
Living in East Haven, Connecticut at the time, with her boyfriend, Jonathan, and he was also the father of her child. And, you know, what we came to find out, you know, was that Jonathan killed Lizzbeth in the early hours of her birthday. He buried her body behind dumpsters in a Brantford restaurant called Lomanico's restaurant, an Italian restaurant that he used to work at. He knew that the restaurant would be shut for the holidays, and he used that to his advantage to bury her body there. Yeah, and it was, Lizzbeth was missing for days, and that's sort of how it all started, because, you know, I think as a sister, Yanni knew, like, there was something wrong, and her sister, who was a dedicated, loving mother, would not just abandon her child under any circumstance. And so things just weren't adding up. But Jonathan had a string of lies and deceptions, and really tried to manipulate the family into believing that she abandoned him and their child, and you know, fed the same lies to police to get police to not look for her, even though the family was reporting her missing.
When he finally went to trial, I think one of the things that stuck out to me was his ultimate sentence, and how even that was unfair, and it was not really a form of justice, because he was able to accept a plea deal. So even as he's being tried for this crime, he still was able to almost control or navigate what his final outcome was. And from what I understand, you guys were frustrated with that as well.
Yeah, it was very, I think, disrespectful overall, not just to Lizzbeth's memory, but I think to the family who's, you know, carried this pain for years. And even though trial would have been its own painful process, that's a right that they have to choose. If they prefer that and taking those risks to get closer to what feels like justice, you know. And I think the state spends so much time always telling families that, you know, there's so much a possibility of losing with jurors, you never know, and even sometimes they have evidence and they have video footage, and the jurors still end up bringing down the charges from murder to attempted manslaughter. And so there was always this constant talk and pressure from the state that, like, you know, it's not worth going to trial, there's too many risks, we don't have enough in terms of evidence. And it's frustrating to hear that, because if they don't have enough evidence, that's the police to blame. You know, that's not on the family. And you would think after everything, and even the fact that FBI got involved at some point, you would think that there would be more evidence. And so to hear that even when you have a family that's doing everything going above and beyond, because, right, police, when police don't react with urgency, right, and they fail to collect evidence in due time, right, whether it's footage or whether it is whatever, that has a lasting impact. And, when police perform differently in certain cases, in certain investigations, right, because of white women or because of an immigrant woman or whatever, that has a lasting impact, right? And so the state constantly felt like they didn't have enough to go to trial. And for us, it was kind of just like, it's not, when you ask a family what is the amount of years that would feel right, there is no number. When you ask a family what is it about the charges, it's both a yes and a no. Because, for being honest, at the end of the day, all he was charged with was murder. But he didn't just kill her. It's the way he disposed of her body. There are charges for that when you tamper with evidence, when you move a body. There was a child who was present when this happened, and whether she saw it or not, she was within the home. There are risks of injury to a minor charges that could have been applied, but that wasn't there. So if we're talking about charges, there's a list of charges that could have gone on, right? Strangulation, right? She was strangled to death. He could have been charged for that. And when there were plea deals that were discussed in the process, right, that was one of it. Like they at one point, the state wanted to reduce the murder charge and offer him, if he was willing to do more years, reduce it to manslaughter and with strangulation and I think with a tampering evidence charge. It was like 3-charge combination that would result in like 25 to 35 years, and they would sort of let the judge decide what the years would be between that range. And that was a no, for a definite no, because even though it had the strangulation and the other stuff, it was like he didn't accidentally murder her. There was nothing accidental about this. This was all premeditated. And to let him off the hook in that way is very insulting to her memory and to what actually happened. At the end of the day, Lizzbeth has a daughter who's going to grow up to want to know the truth and deserves to know the truth, right? And those charges is not a reflection of what really happened, And it doesn't honor Lizzbeth, it doesn't honor her story, it doesn't honor her loved ones who have fought so hard for truth and justice, right? So we pushed back heavily on that. And, I think it got to a point where Jonathan started to understand that the family was willing to go to trial if it meant making sure that we had murder charge on the table. And, I think that scared him. And I think that's why last minute he sort of, and like you said, at the end of the day, it was still all on his terms. He always made things on his terms, and the state was always, it felt like giving into his terms and conditions of what he's willing. It was always, he's not willing to do more than 20. That was always clear to us. He's not willing to do more than 20. And I was like, I don't care. Did he make that up when he killed her? Like, I don't understand, what gives him the right. But it was really hard, and I think last minute he ends up deciding he would stick with the murder charge, but only if he did the minimum amount of years, which was 25. He wasn't going to risk doing up to 60. And once the state heard that, they were like, great, you're going to plead a murder? We love it, we'll take it. And it was enough for them. And it's hard to fight the state and to expect them to do well in a trial when they already feel like they have enough justice, right? Even if that's not enough for the family, the state isn't advocating for you, right? Like victims of femicide and their loved ones don't have an attorney, don't have someone who's representing their interests. The state is representing the state's interests. And while, yes, Lizzbeth is a victim, you know, we don't spend enough time talking about, you know, the victims' rights and their loved ones' rights in that way. And so it very much feels like these cases sort of revolve around what the perpetrator, what the killer's willing to acknowledge, what they're willing to do. And it's hard because a lot of times we don't have resources. And resources looks like many forms, has many forms, right? It's not just financial resources, it's also the support that you have from family and friends. Like that's a huge resource that a lot of victims don't have, that families impacted by femicide don't have. They're grieving, right? They're not here building their network and getting all their alliances, like they're grieving and they're trying to navigate a system while grieving. And so I think that, you know, abusers have such a vantage point, and the system is in many ways set up for them, to support them, not to support the families or the victims. And so, you know, the terms were sort of set by him, and the state felt like it was enough. And so families, I feel like, are just kind of shuffled along the process. And it's very hurtful, and I think that especially when you have families that are just pouring into giving so much to make sure that there is justice, I don't think, you know, the state has the right to give up on families or to bring less to the table, you know, and I understand that juries and jurors, how complicated all of that is. But that is also why we do that, you know, work in the communities, that cultural work, because we have to get to a point where we're understanding these issues, where it's not about the evidence, how much evidence do I have, can I see the footage of how he did this and why he did this. Like, we're not always going to have all of that evidence, but we have enough information, data, and research about domestic violence, about intimate partner violence, about how this results in the deaths of women. And so I think we need to stop turning away from it, right? And when we see the connections, like we need to make those connections. A lot of times we don't identify the women who have been killed as victims of domestic violence, or if we do, it's not until much later, you know, and that's harmful to our communities, because it's not helping us understand really how often this is happening and how real of an issue it is within our communities.
You are so right on so many levels of what you just said. You know, the statistics are off, and the statistics matter, because when you have the appropriate statistics, that's what pushes for change and gets the attention of lawmakers and the legal system as far as, okay, these statistics look really bad, we need to do something about it now. The judicial system a lot of times does look at what their idea of justice is, and they do often forget what justice means to family and to victims. And victims often turn into a case. And I don't want that to happen with Lizzbeth. She was a person. So I would love for you guys to talk about her. Let us know the kind of person she was, the kind of mom, the kind of sister that she was, and let's just talk about her as a person. Because we all need to remember that victims, it's not just a tragic story, it's a person.
Bigger to me when I was little as well. Well, like I mentioned, I came from Mexico. We were just probably 15. I was probably like 13 or so. So yeah, she became like a parent figure to me as well. So she absolutely grew up very, very quick, but she always took that responsibility with a lot of love and care. So that's something that I admire from her, because even though we didn't have like a family where we were loved and all that, but she did her best. I know she did. And when she became a mother, she surprised me even more because she became kind of like that mother that she never had in her life. So she was very caring. As she was born premature. She was about 6-7 months. So for her to become a mother as well was very, very difficult. But she was there every minute. She was at the hospital all the time. She was taking care of her baby. Always fighting for her to be in a good place. Not only emotionally, also physically. And also, she was pregnant too, and she took care of herself as much as she could. And when Ashley was born, she dedicated her time to be a mom. And she didn't want to leave her daycare until Ashley was like old enough where she could speak and say, hey mom, have a good day or a bad day. So
For those of us who never had the opportunity to meet her, is there anything that you would want us to specifically know about her?
I have these situations most of the time when people say, she was lovely and caring, and she was the best person ever. I'm not saying it just to say it. She wasn't the type of person that would bother anyone. She was just like, okay, if I have to go to work, she would go to work. She would come back to her family and just be with her family. Try to be with the loved ones as well. She was very funny and creative as well. She used to focus a lot of her emotions as well by drawing. She was kind of like a hobby that she had, but like I said, she didn't bother no one, at least. It was just like, hey, just gonna use those emotions, that creativity, and for something to, for her own. But in my opinion, she just didn't have a lot to lift. I don't think he was the love of her life. I don't think she got that opportunity to experience either, because they met when they were very young. She met him when she was in high school, so been there for like 10 years or so. So she was a person that was pretty out there, I guess also comes in our culture. As an immigrant as well, it affects us a lot. Coming to a new country where you don't know the language, you don't know the people, you barely know your neighbors, and kind of like the couple friends that you have, you just kind of stick to. It's much easier than the unknown sometimes. But also for us to like open up about this during this, it's kind of like a taboo about it. There's a lot of things that we don't talk. And it sucks because, from where we come from, we know the neighbors, we know who's around, and it's just different. The culture is completely different. And here, everyone is just so that you have to, I don't know, just hide, or pretend like you're not there. But yeah, it's just the fear of those things out there too. I was, while we were looking in so many aspects, it's unfortunately that this happened and continues to happen to a lot of women. We've seen this a lot as well in Mexico, but it's, like I said, taboo and no one talks about it. But it affects you the most when it's happened to someone that you love, someone you care. And so you start seeing the picture, but it's just not only one little thing, it's beyond that. It's a lot of things going on. And as it all starts with the family you have, it all starts with the love you received.
She sounds like an amazing woman, amazing mom, maybe amazing sister. Vanessa, if people want to learn more about Vivan Las Autonomas, how do they get in touch?
You can follow our Instagram page, Vivan Las Autonomas, which in English that means long live autonomous women. And so we believe women have autonomy in terms of the lifestyles they want to live, who they want to love, how they want to evolve. I think that often what we're seeing is that the way women are harmed often by people that love them because of who we are and how we choose to live our lives freely in an autonomous way. And so we do a lot of work in the community to raise awareness around not just femicide, but gender violence and all the ways it shows up. So you can follow our Instagram page. We have a link tree connected up there. We don't have a website yet, but we are working next year to launch Connecticut's first femicide website. And so we're really excited about that. It's been really a project that I've been working on since Lizzbeth's death. I really wanted to understand how else this was showing up in our communities. I wanted to understand how many more women were missing and had been murdered and what was happening with their stories and their cases. And so since 2020, I've been tracking the deaths of women across Connecticut, all gender-related killings. And so our goal is to launch a website next year. It won't have all of it yet because I think we've actually have quite a lot in our database, it's really sad that it's that many, but I think we're really excited for our initial launch because we are not just sharing femicides across Connecticut as a form of data. It really is more of an artistic project. It is really a labor of love. And I think that, it's both a way to show elected officials across our state that this is a serious issue, that it's actually not being addressed by the current institutions and agencies that are supposed to be addressing this, or they think that they are, right? And so I think it's going to show the real scope of the issue, how prevalent is femicide. And frankly, our numbers are more and differ than the numbers that domestic violence agencies are reporting as far as fatalities because of domestic violence, right? And so what does it mean when agencies are only counting certain deaths, right? And what does it look like when we actually have a higher number of women in our state that are being killed because of gendered violence than what we think there is? And I think that, for us, it's really important for folks to also understand who these women were, right? And that they had a story and that they were someone, and that the loss of their life, of their light, has a tremendous impact, and not just for their loved ones, but for community members as well. I have seen how this devastates beyond family members, and I think that it's way past time that we don't not just create the resources for these families, but also create a space that honors all of these victims, and that helps these families connect with one another and really feel like they're not isolated in this type of violence and this type of grief and loss. That unfortunately it's happening far more than we think it is. But that if we all, right, what would it look like if we all came together and demanded that our elected officials really prioritize this, right? Like, what would it look like if we, on a municipal level, started to issue that, or make aware of the fact that femicide is a public health issue, right? That this is a crisis that we're in, right? What would it look like if our local government started to look and respond to it as that? But we don't even have that. That's not a conversation we're having on a local or state level, despite numerous deaths of women, and it's immigrant women, it's Black women, it's white women, it's everyone, and the response has still always been the same. Police investigate, we'll take it to trial, maybe not, there's a conviction, but that's it. There's nothing else other than, funding domestic violence agencies, which they have stated they don't do anything about the fact that a woman is killed because of domestic violence, right? Their job, the scope of their work goes up and, as far as women are alive. But if they die or when they die, that is not part of their responsibilities or their work that they have to do. They don't have to follow up. They don't have to look into why. They don't have to report to the state, how they're going to change what they're doing, their approach, or nothing. It doesn't require anything, even if the victim was being serviced by that agency. There is nothing they have to do other than report this victim died because of domestic violence. That's it. And that's not getting us anywhere, right? Especially when we have elected officials that think these are the agencies that are responding to their deaths. They're not. They're just reporting them. They're not responding to them. And the police aren't addressing the issue either. They're supposed to investigate it, and in most cases they're not properly investigating it, right? And so I think we're left with then what are we going to do about this? And our hope is that by having this launching this website and sharing these stories and doing it with intention and through art, that we're able to really not just reach the hearts of folks, but get folks to also start to be in deep reflection about how this is genuinely showing up in their communities and what we can and cannot do. I think for a long time we've just convinced ourselves that there is nothing we can do unless the victim reports. And I think we need to stop saying that and really start owning this issue of, like, if a woman dies in our community, essentially we have all failed her, right? And if we normalize this, we're continuing to fail women. And so what are we individually and collectively doing to make sure that we don't normalize this, right? To make sure that we are asking the questions, to make sure that there are proper investigations, to make sure that there is urgency and conversation when a woman is killed, and it's not just, I'm sorry for this family, sending prayers and thoughts. Like, that is not helping us end gender violence or end femicide.
Vanessa, thank you so much for all of your work you're doing, your dedication, your perseverance to keep that light alive and be that voice for so many individuals who are either choosing to be silent or feeling that they have to be silent, that they have no other choice but to be silent. Your work that you're doing is amazing, and I would love to keep updated with how you guys are doing. And thank you so much for your time and sharing a little bit of an insight into your sister with all of us. And I really appreciate that. I know it's difficult to talk about, but she sounds like she was a beautiful person, and I'm honored that you shared her with us. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you again, Vanessa and Yaneth, for joining me today, and thank you, Warriors, for listening. I've included the links Vanessa was referring to, as well as her 1 in 3 profile, in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong, and wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1in3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1in3podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1in3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.